I'm Woody, 35 years old, and until last month I thought my brother Marcus and I were close despite our 10-year age gap. When he announced his engagement to Amber, I was genuinely happy for them. So when they asked to use my lakefront property for their dream wedding, how could I refuse? Little did I know that behind those smiles and thank yous lurked a calculated plan to take what I'd spent years building. Before I dive into how my own brother tried to steal my house, drop a comment where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens when my lawyer steps in. Growing up, Marcus and I shared more than just DNA. We shared a bond forged through difficult times. With a 10-year age difference between us, I always felt more like his protector than just his brother. When our parents divorced during Marcus's elementary school years, I was already a teenager, old enough to understand the fractures forming in our family, but young enough to feel the pain just as deeply. Our father moved across the country shortly after the divorce, making sporadic appearances during holidays before eventually starting a new family and fading from our lives almost completely. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, which meant I often stepped in as the male role model in Marcus's life. I helped him with homework, attended his school events, and tried my best to shield him from the harsh realities of our new financial situation. Those early years taught me the value of hard work and financial independence. I started mowing lawns at 14, bagged groceries through high school, and worked night shifts at a warehouse to put myself through college. Unlike some of my peers who partied their way through their education, I graduated with a business degree and minimal student loans. My first job out of college wasn't glamorous, a junior position at a commercial real estate firm with long hours and modest pay, but I absorbed everything, networked relentlessly, and saved every penny possible. By 27, I had enough for a down payment on my first investment property, a small fixer-upper that I renovated myself on weekends and eventually flipped for a healthy profit. One investment led to another, and by my early 30s I had built a respectable portfolio of rental properties across 3 states. The lakefront house wasn't just another investment. It was my reward to myself, my dream home. A 4-bedroom craftsman with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington private dock and enough land for privacy without isolation. I paid cash for it 3 years ago, after selling my most successful commercial development. Throughout my climb up the financial ladder, I never forgot Marcus. When he graduated high school and got accepted to State University, I covered his textbooks and housing costs. When his car broke down junior year, I helped him finance a reliable replacement. Not because I expected repayment, but because that's what family does. We support each other. Marcus always had a natural charm about him. Where I was methodical and reserved, he was spontaneous and magnetic. People gravitated toward his easy smile and confident demeanor. But alongside these qualities came a streak of entitlement that worried me occasionally. He expected doors to open for him, opportunities to fall into his lap, and problems to resolve themselves without much effort on his part. I met Amber 2 years ago when Marcus brought her to my annual 4th of July barbecue. She was undeniably beautiful, tall blonde with the kind of polished appearance that suggested careful attention to detail. Her background in luxury real estate marketing meant we had something in common professionally, though I noticed she seemed more interested in discussing high-end properties than the actual work involved in acquiring them. Looking back, the red flags were there from the beginning. The way her eyes widened when she first walked through my front door. How she immediately asked for a tour, lingering in each room to comment on architectural details or potential improvements. The casual questions about property values in the area and whether I planned to stay long-term. Marcus announced their engagement after dating for just 1 year. I took them to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown to celebrate, noticing how Amber spent most of the evening discussing wedding venues and costs. When I asked about their plans after marriage, their answers were vague, something about exploring opportunities and keeping options open. In the months leading up to their wedding request, I realized Marcus had been calling less frequently. Our usual Sunday phone calls became briefer, more superficial. When we did meet up, Amber was always present, steering conversations toward their future plans, or circling back to compliments about my home. The comfortable rapport Marcus and I once shared felt increasingly strained, but I chalked it up to pre-wedding stress and the natural evolution of relationships. Little did I know that the distance growing between us wasn't accidental, it was strategic. It was a mild spring evening when Marcus called to invite himself and Amber over for dinner. "We have something special to discuss with you," he said, a note of excitement in his voice that made me smile. I spent the afternoon preparing their favorite meal, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables and my signature garlic mashed potatoes. I even splurged on an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon to celebrate whatever news they wanted to share. They arrived precisely at 7, Amber wearing an elegant sundress, and Marcus looking unusually formal in pressed chinos and a button-down shirt. After exchanging hugs, I led them through the house to the back deck where I'd set up dinner overlooking the lake. The sunset cast a golden glow across the water, creating the perfect backdrop for a special evening. "Woody, this view never gets old." Amber sighed, running her hand along the cedar railing. "Your property is absolutely spectacular." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Seriously, bro, every time we visit I'm blown away. The way the house is positioned on this lot, the landscaping, the private beach access. You really lucked out finding this place." I chuckled at that. Luck had very little to do with it. I spent years searching for the right property and negotiated for months to get it at a price that made sense. "Well, it was worth every penny," Amber said, her gaze sweeping across the expansive lawn that sloped gently down to the shoreline. "The terraced garden would be perfect for setting up rows of chairs, don't you think, Marcus?" That comment struck me as odd, but I didn't have time to question it before Marcus cleared his throat and placed his arm around Amber's waist. "Actually, that's part of what we wanted to talk to you about tonight." We settled into dinner, and they waited until I'd poured the wine before dropping their request. Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Woody, we've been looking at wedding venues for weeks now, and nothing feels right. Then last night Amber had this amazing idea." Amber picked up seamlessly. "We were looking through photos from last summer's barbecue here, and it just hit me. This is our dream venue. The lake, the gardens, the spacious interior. It would be absolutely perfect for our wedding." "You want to get married? Here? At my house?" The request caught me completely off guard. "Not just the ceremony," Marcus clarified. "The whole thing. Ceremony on the lawn overlooking the lake, cocktail hour on the deck, reception in the great room. We'd handle everything. Catering, decorations, cleanup." Amber's eyes shimmered with enthusiasm. "I've already sketched out how everything would be arranged. The altar would be positioned right at the edge of the lower terrace with the lake as a backdrop. We'd have white chairs set up in rows across the lawn, a flower-lined aisle." As she continued describing her vision in vivid detail, I realized this wasn't a spontaneous idea, but something they'd been planning extensively. A sense of unease settled in my stomach. "How many guests are we talking about?" I asked cautiously. "Just 150, Amber replied, as if that were a small, intimate gathering rather than a significant event that would transform my private residence into a public venue. I set my fork down carefully. That's a lot of people trampling across my property, and there are liability issues to consider, not to mention the logistics of parking, bathrooms, power requirements. Marcus's face fell, instantly disappointment clouding his features. "I thought you'd be happy for us. This is the most important day of our lives." "I am happy for you," I assured him quickly. "I'm just concerned about the practicalities." "We'll handle everything," Amber insisted. "My dad knows a fantastic event planner who can manage all those details." Marcus reached across the table and grasped my hand, something he hadn't done since childhood. "Woody, you're the only real family I have. Dad's been gone for years, and Mom." He swallowed hard, referring to our mother's passing 3 years ago. "It would mean everything to have our wedding at the place that feels most like home to me." The emotional manipulation was obvious but effective. Our shared grief over Mom's death was still raw, and Marcus knew exactly how to leverage it. I felt my resistance weakening. "When would this be?" I asked. 8 weeks from now," Amber replied promptly. "Saturday, June 25th. "So soon? Don't most venues book up a year in advance?" "That's part of the problem," Marcus explained. "We had a venue, but they double-booked and just informed us last week. We've been scrambling to find a replacement." Another red flag I ignored. Their story about a double booking seemed convenient, particularly given how detailed Amber's vision for my property already was. You wouldn't have to worry about anything, Marcus promised. We'd take care of all the arrangements, costs, everything. You could even stay at a hotel that weekend if you wanted some privacy. After another hour of discussion and a second bottle of wine, I reluctantly agreed with clear conditions. They would handle all logistics, to obtain proper event insurance, to be responsible for any damages, and ensure everything was returned to normal by Monday afternoon following the weekend. You won't regret this, Marcus said, embracing me tightly. We'll make sure everything goes perfectly. The initial planning meeting seemed reasonable enough. Amber brought her event planner, Tiffany, who took meticulous notes about the property layout and discussed logistics professionally. We agreed on boundaries, which areas of the house would be accessible to guests and which would remain off-limits. I specified that my home office and master bedroom would be locked during the event, and they readily agreed. But as weeks passed, the scope of their plans expanded alarmingly. What started as a one-day event gradually morphed into a full weekend affair. Vendors began arriving days earlier than scheduled to prepare the space. Landscapers showed up unannounced one Tuesday morning while I was on a conference call. "We're here to modify the garden terracing," the foreman explained when I confronted him. "Miss Amber said you approved the changes last week." I had approved no such thing. When I called Marcus, he brushed off my concerns. "It's just some minor adjustments to make the ceremony space flow better. They'll put everything back exactly how it was, I promise." 2 days later, I returned home from a business lunch to find interior designers measuring my living room and discussing wall colors. "The existing shade is lovely," one woman was saying, "but for the photos, a warmer tone would create a more romantic atmosphere." "Excuse me," I interrupted. "What exactly are you planning to do to my walls?" They looked startled by my presence. "Mr. Marcus approved a temporary color change for the main entertaining spaces," the designer explained. "Just for the wedding weekend. We'll repaint it back afterward." That evening, Amber's parents made their first visit to the property. Harold and Patricia Barrett struck me as calculated from the moment they stepped through my front door. Harold, a retired banking executive, spent more time examining my property than engaging in conversation. Patricia kept making comments like, "This space would be perfect if you just opened up that wall, and I imagine this would be lovely as a nursery someday." After they left, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the core. I had stepped onto the deck to retrieve some glasses when voices drifted up from the garden below. "It's even better than you described," Harold was saying. "Prime waterfront like this rarely comes on the market." "I told you it was perfect," Amber replied. "Once we're established here, we can make the necessary improvements." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Patricia cautioned. "One step at a time. For now, focus on the wedding and making sure everything goes according to plan." I froze, wineglass in hand, as their words settled over me. What exactly were they planning? The following weeks brought an escalating parade of intrusions that left me feeling like a stranger in my own home. Every morning seemed to bring new vendors arriving hours before scheduled appointments, wandering freely through spaces that should have been off-limits. The landscaping crew had completely redesigned my garden layout, removing mature plants I had carefully selected and replacing them with what the head gardener called more suitable wedding foliage. My natural stone pathway was temporarily covered with white gravel that scattered across the lawn with every breeze. The Japanese maple I had planted in memory of my mother was now surrounded by rented topiaries that blocked its view from the house. "The changes are temporary," Marcus insisted when I confronted him, though I noticed he wouldn't look me directly in the eyes. "Everything will be restored exactly as it was after the wedding." Inside was even worse. Interior designers had moved beyond measuring to actually rearranging furniture, creating staging areas in various corners of my home. I returned from a quick grocery run to find my living room furniture pushed against walls to improve flow, and my dining room table completely replaced with a larger rented one. "We need to accommodate the head table for 12, explained the wedding coordinator when I questioned the change. Mr. Marcus assured us this was approved. Marcus had a response for everything. When I discovered paint swatches taped to my walls, he claimed they were just considering options, but wouldn't actually paint without my final approval. When I found window treatment specialists measuring for new drapes, he said they were only getting dimensions for decorative overlays, not permanent changes. Your overreacting became his standard response to my concerns. This is how weddings work. There are a lot of moving pieces and sometimes things get confused in communication. But the red flags were multiplying too quickly to ignore. One afternoon I discovered Amber's parents in my home office, a room specifically designated as off-limits, with a tape measure and notebook. The door was unlocked. Harold explained smoothly, though I was certain I had locked it that morning. Amber asked us to check the dimensions for the gift table. The excuse made no sense, since the gifts would logically be displayed in the main reception area, not tucked away in a private office. Later that same day, I found a business card for a local moving company tucked under my keyboard with a date penciled in for the Monday after the wedding. Most disturbing of all was finding architectural plans left behind on my kitchen counter after a meeting between Amber and her parents. The rolled blueprint had fallen partially open, revealing detailed renovations to my property, wall removals and extended deck, and what appeared to be a substantial addition to the west wing. When I texted Marcus about it, he claimed they were just dream boards for Amber's someday home and not specific to my property. The situation had progressed from uncomfortable to deeply concerning. I reached out to my friend Jordan, who specialized in real estate law, inviting him over for a beer and an unofficial consultation. "This doesn't sound right," Woody Jordan said after I explained the situation. "The level of changes they're making, the way they're acting like they have authority over the property. It's concerning. They keep saying everything's temporary, but it doesn't feel that way," I admitted. "And I've overheard conversations that suggest they have longer-term plans involving my house." Jordan's expression grew serious. "There's something called adverse possession you should be aware of. It's a legal concept where someone can potentially claim property rights through continuous occupation and improvement of the land, especially if the true owner appears to have given permission." "But I've only given them permission for a weekend wedding, not to live here," I protested. "Right, but if they move in afterward and you don't immediately evict them, things could get complicated, especially if they've made improvements to the property that you've seemingly approved." Jordan's words sent a chill through me. What should I do? Document everything. Take photos of your property now, save all text messages and emails about the arrangements, and be extremely clear in writing about the timeline and expectations. And honestly, I'd have a lawyer on standby for the day after the wedding just in case. That evening, I called Richard Harmon, my attorney, who had handled the purchase of this very property. I explained the situation, trying not to sound paranoid, while conveying my genuine concerns. "It does sound suspicious," Richard agreed, "especially the architectural plans and the moving company card. Let's prepare for the worst-case scenario while hoping it doesn't come to that." We developed a plan. Richard would prepare the necessary documentation to address any potential adverse possession claim. He would also be available on short notice the day after the wedding should the need arise. With legal precautions in place, I focused on documenting everything. I photographed every room in the house from multiple angles, creating a detailed record of my property's condition. I installed small, unobtrusive security cameras in common areas, making sure to comply with all privacy laws while protecting myself. And I began keeping a journal of all wedding-related activities, noting dates, times, and any concerning statements or behaviors. As the wedding weekend approached, Marcus and Amber's requests became increasingly invasive. They wanted keys to every room just in case. They asked if they could store personal items in my garage temporarily. They even suggested I remove family photos from walls to create a neutral backdrop. Through it all, I maintained a delicate balance, accommodating reasonable requests while firmly denying those that crossed boundaries. The tension between us grew palpably, with Marcus becoming increasingly frustrated by what he called my rigidity and lack of support. "This is supposed to be the happiest time of our lives," he complained, during one particularly heated discussion. "Why are you making everything so difficult?" "I'm not making things difficult," I replied calmly. "I'm simply protecting my home while still allowing you to have your wedding here." "It's always about property and assets with you," he snapped. "Never about family and what really matters." His words stung, especially given how much I had supported him over the years. But they also hardened my resolve to protect what I had worked so hard to build. The day before the wedding, I packed a bag for my hotel stay, carefully locked my office and bedroom, and took one last look around my home. I couldn't shake the feeling that when I returned, nothing would be the same. As agreed, I checked into the Lakeside Hotel on Friday afternoon, giving Marcus, Amber, and their wedding party full access to the property for rehearsal and final preparations. The hotel was comfortable enough, a sleek modern building with all the expected amenities, but it felt strange to be paying for accommodation when my own home sat just 3 miles away. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday evening at a restaurant downtown, followed by the rehearsal itself at my property. I attended the dinner, making polite conversation with Amber's extensive family who had flown in from across the country. Throughout the evening, I couldn't help but notice how many of them mentioned looking forward to seeing the property, as if my home were a tourist attraction rather than a private residence. After dinner, we caravanned back to my house for the rehearsal. The transformation was already startling. The entire driveway was lined with twinkling lights. A massive white tent dominated my back lawn. Inside my home hardly looked like my own. Furniture, rearranged walls adorned with fabric, draping floral arrangements, occupying every surface. "Isn't it beautiful?" Amber gushed, spinning around my great room with arms extended. "Better than any venue we could have rented." The wedding planner walked the bridal party through the ceremony process, positioning everyone at their marks on the back lawn, while I stood awkwardly to the side, feeling like a spectator rather than the property owner. As they rehearsed, I realized I had forgotten to pack my medication and quietly slipped away to my bedroom. The door was unlocked, despite my clear memory of securing it before leaving. Inside, I was shocked to find several suitcases stacked in the corner, none of which belonged to me. My dresser drawers were partially open, my closet door ajar, and several items on my nightstand had been shifted. Most concerning of all, my prescription medication was missing from its usual spot. I found Amber's mother in the kitchen directing caterers who were setting up for the next day. "Patricia, do you know why there are suitcases in my bedroom?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite my growing alarm. She barely glanced up from her clipboard. "Oh, Amber and Marcus needed somewhere to store the honeymoon luggage. The guest rooms are all being used by the bridal party." "But that room was supposed to be locked and off limits," I pointed out. Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "I'm sure they just needed a secure place for their things. You know how chaotic weddings can be." Rather than create a scene the night before the wedding, I simply relocated the suitcases to the hallway, relocked my bedroom door, and made a mental note to check all locks again before leaving. As I headed back toward the rehearsal, I passed the sunroom where Amber's father was engaged in intense conversation with a man I didn't recognize. They had spread papers across the table, what looked like floor plans and property documents. "The existing foundation can definitely support the addition," the stranger was saying, tracing a line on the document. "But we'd need to check local ordinances about building this close to the shoreline." I cleared my throat loudly as I entered, and both men hastily gathered up their papers. "Woody, just the man we wanted to see," Harold boomed with artificial joviality. "This is Stanley, my architect friend. He was just admiring your beautiful home." "Architect," I echoed. I wasn't aware architectural consultations were part of wedding preparations. Stanley looked uncomfortable. "I should get going. We can continue this discussion later, Harold." He slipped past me with a brief nod. "Just getting some professional opinions on your property," Harold explained vaguely. "Remarkable craftsmanship throughout." The rehearsal wrapped up shortly afterward, and I returned to my hotel with a growing sense of dread. I called Richard to update him on these latest developments. "Take photos of anything suspicious," he advised. "And check your property deed. Make sure it's in a secure location outside your house." The wedding day itself dawned clear and sunny, as if nature had aligned with Amber's careful planning. I arrived early to change into my suit, finding my house already bustling with activity. Florists, caterers, photographers, and various members of the wedding party streamed in and out of rooms, treating the space as communal rather than private. I managed to reclaim my bedroom long enough to dress for the ceremony, noting with dismay that someone had clearly been through my things again. The suitcases I had removed had returned, now joined by garment bags and makeup cases. The ceremony itself was admittedly beautiful. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced the lake with an archway of flowers framing the water view. Marcus looked genuinely happy as he waited at the altar, and Amber was radiant in her elaborate gown as she processed down the aisle on her father's arm. Throughout the service, I tried to focus on the happiness of the occasion rather than my lingering concerns. These were valid fears, I told myself, but perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps this was simply an elaborate wedding, not a stealth attempt to claim my property. Those reassurances evaporated during the reception. As best man, I was seated at the head table alongside the bridal party. Midway through dinner, Harold stood to offer his toast champagne glass raised high. To Marcus and Amber he began, his voice carrying across the great room. May your future in this beautiful home be filled with joy and prosperity. When you first showed us this property, Amber, we knew it was special. Now, as we gather to celebrate your union, we also celebrate the beginning of your new life in this spectacular setting. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd while I sat frozen in shock. Marcus avoided my gaze entirely suddenly, very interested in adjusting his boutonniere. The maid of honor's toast included an anecdote about Amber finally finding her dream home and her dream husband all at once. The wedding coordinator referred to the Barrett Mills residence when directing guests to various amenities. Even the cake topper featured a tiny bride and groom standing before what was unmistakably my house, complete with its distinctive cedar siding and lakefront dock. During a quiet moment between dinner and dancing, I overheard Amber telling her bridesmaid, "We'll be living here soon. Marcus already has the arrangement worked out with his brother." I slipped away from the reception, retreating to my locked office where I had hidden a spare key. Inside, I called Richard again. "It's worse than we thought," I told him quietly. "They're telling everyone they're moving in after the honeymoon. They've got some scheme planned." "When are they supposed to leave the property?" Richard asked. "They're departing for their honeymoon tomorrow morning. The cleanup crew is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I'm supposed to return Monday morning." "All right," Richard said after a moment's consideration. "Here's what we'll do. I'll meet you at your house early Monday morning before you're officially scheduled to return. If they've left as planned, great. If not, we'll handle it legally and decisively." I agreed to the plan, then rejoined the reception with forced cheer. Throughout the evening, I made a point of congratulating the couple, smiling for photographs and playing the role of supportive brother and gracious host. But I also made mental notes of every concerning comment, every suggestion that this was more than just a wedding venue. As the night wound down and guests began departing, I discovered the business card for a moving company on the kitchen counter, the same company whose card I had found earlier, but now with confirmed appointment details for 8 a.m. Monday morning. There was no longer any doubt. Marcus and Amber weren't just using my home for their wedding. They were planning to move in afterward, creating a situation that could potentially lead to a legal nightmare if not addressed immediately. I left the reception early, returning to my hotel to prepare for what was clearly going to be a confrontation. I spent Sunday reviewing documentation with Richard over the phone, ensuring we had everything needed to legally protect my property. "Be prepared for emotional manipulation," Richard warned. "Based on what you've told me, your brother will likely try to make this about family loyalty rather than the legal property issue it actually is." "I know," I sighed. "He's always been good at that. Just remember, you've done nothing wrong here. You generously offered your home for their wedding. You never agreed to anything beyond that." As I packed my bag Sunday evening, I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and sadness. How had my relationship with Marcus deteriorated to this point? When had he decided my property was something he could simply claim for himself? And what would our relationship look like after the confrontation I knew was coming? With these heavy thoughts, I tried to get some sleep before the morning's inevitable conflict. Monday morning arrived with a steady drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I checked out of the hotel at 6:30, earlier than necessary, and drove slowly through the quiet streets toward my home. Richard had agreed to arrive by 7:30, giving us time to assess the situation before any potential moving trucks appeared. As I turned onto my street, my heart sank. A large white moving truck was already parked in my driveway, its rear doors wide open. Two men in uniform were unloading furniture I had never seen before. A sectional sofa, a dining set, several large wardrobes. I parked on the street watching the scene unfold for several minutes. Marcus and Amber were both present, directing the movers with animated gestures. Amber's parents stood on my front porch, pointing and discussing something with a third man who appeared to be taking measurements of my entryway. Taking a deep breath, I texted Richard, "They're already here. Moving truck and furniture being unloaded. Please hurry." His response was immediate. "On my way. Do not confront them alone. Wait for me if possible." But as I watched another piece of furniture, a massive 4-poster bed, being wheeled toward my front door, waiting became impossible. This was my home, purchased with my money, maintained with my efforts. I couldn't sit idly by while it was invaded. I approached slowly, deliberately, making no effort to hide my arrival. Marcus spotted me first, his expression shifting rapidly from shock to forced joviality. "Woody, you're back early," he called out with artificial cheer. "We thought you wouldn't be here until this afternoon." "Clearly," I replied, eyeing the moving truck. "What's going on here, Marcus?" Amber stepped forward, looking perfectly put together despite the early hour, in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. "Oh, we're just moving some things in temporarily," she explained smoothly. "My apartment lease ended, and rather than renew for just a few months, we thought we'd store some furniture here until we find our permanent place." Some furniture, I gestured to the truck, now half emptied, onto my driveway. "This looks like an entire household." Harold descended the porch steps, hand extended as if we were meeting for a friendly business lunch. "Woody, good to see you. Hope the wedding cleanup went smoothly. We took the liberty of helping the kids get settled in the guest wing while they house hunt." "Guest wing," I repeated. "My house doesn't have a guest wing, and we never discussed anyone staying here after the wedding." Marcus approached, slinging an arm around my shoulders that I immediately shrugged off. "Come on, bro. It's just temporary. A few months tops while we find the perfect place. You've got all this space and you're hardly ever here with all your business trips." I stepped back, creating distance between us. The agreement was that everything would be back to normal by this afternoon. That means all wedding-related items removed, all furniture returned to its original position, and yes, no one living in my house. Patricia joined us in the driveway, her pleasant expression belied by the coldness in her eyes. "Marcus mentioned you were always generous with family. He assured us you'd be delighted to have them stay, especially since you travel so much for business." I turned to my brother, anger rising. "Is that what you told them? That I'd agreed to this arrangement?" For the first time, Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Not exactly. I just said you'd probably be fine with it given how close we are." And the contractors I saw measuring my entryway, the architectural plans I found for renovating my property, the moving company scheduled for today that you never mentioned, were those all things you thought I'd probably be fine with too? Amber's face flushed. Those were just ideas we were exploring. Nothing was finalized. Actually came a new voice from behind me. It appears quite a lot was finalized without the property owner's consent. Richard had arrived impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit despite the early hour, leather briefcase in hand. His timing couldn't have been better. "Who's this?" Harold demanded, his friendly facade cracking slightly. "Richard Harmon, legal counsel for Woody Mills." Richard introduced himself calmly. "And you appear to be in the process of moving into my client's property without authorization." Marcus stepped forward, his charm shifting into high gear. "There's been a misunderstanding. We're just temporarily storing some items while we look for our own place. Woody and I are brothers. We don't need formal agreements between family." "Actually, you do," Richard countered, "especially when it involves real estate transactions or occupancy arrangements." Mr. Mills was clear that his property was available for the wedding weekend, only with all parties to vacate and restore the property to its original condition by Monday afternoon. "We're family," Marcus insisted, turning to me with the same expression he had used as a child when asking for favors. "Remember how you always said I could count on you, after everything we've been through together?" "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't use our history to manipulate me. This isn't about family, Marcus. This is about respect for boundaries and property rights." Amber tried a different approach, tears suddenly welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. "We just wanted a fresh start, somewhere beautiful to begin our marriage. Is that so wrong?" "What's wrong?" I replied. Maintaining my composure is attempting to move into someone's home without their knowledge or permission. What's wrong is lying to your parents about arrangements that were never made. Harold's expression had shifted from friendly to calculating. Marcus assured us he had partial ownership rights to this property, that it was a family asset. Richard immediately opened his briefcase and withdrew a document. I have here the property deed, which clearly shows Woodrow Mills as the sole owner. There are no co-ownership arrangements, no family trusts involved, no legal claim whatsoever for anyone else. Marcus paled visibly. I never said I owned it. I just implied that I had certain rights to use it. Rights that were never granted, I pointed out. I bought this property myself with money I earned. You have no legal claim to it whatsoever. Amber turned to Marcus, the tears suddenly gone, replaced by cold anger. You told me your name was on the deed, that your brother had put the house in both your names after your mother died. I may have exaggerated a bit, Marcus admitted, avoiding everyone's gaze. Exaggerated, Patricia's voice rose sharply. You told us this property would be your marital home, that renovations were already approved, that your brother was planning to move to the East Coast for work. The pieces were falling into place. Marcus had constructed an elaborate fiction not just for his in-laws, but apparently for Amber as well. He had leveraged my generosity, regarding the wedding, into a scheme to claim my property as his own. I need everyone who doesn't live here to leave immediately, I stated firmly. That means all of you and your moving truck and any contractors or workers you've scheduled. You can't just throw us out, Marcus protested, desperation creeping into his voice. We have nowhere to go. All our stuff is already half unloaded. Be reasonable. Actually, Richard interjected smoothly, as the legal property owner, Mr. Mills, has every right to require you to leave. Should you refuse, we are prepared to contact the sheriff's department regarding trespassing. Harold stepped forward, businessman to businessman. Perhaps we can work something out. A lease arrangement. Perhaps market rate, of course. No, I said firmly. This is my personal residence, not a rental property. I want everyone off my property within the hour. The moving truck driver, who had been watching this unfold while leaning against his vehicle, cleared his throat. So, should we put this furniture back in the truck, or what? Yes, I confirmed. Everything goes back in the truck immediately. What followed was a tense hour of reversed activity. The movers reloaded furniture while Marcus alternated between pleading with me privately and arguing with Amber about his deception. Harold made several phone calls, presumably arranging alternative accommodations. Patricia consoled a now genuinely tearful Amber. Throughout it all, Richard remained by my side, a calm, professional presence that prevented the situation from deteriorating further. When Marcus attempted one final emotional appeal, bringing up childhood memories and family obligations, Richard quietly reminded him of the legal reality. Your brother has been more than generous, he pointed out. Many property owners would have already called law enforcement. As the moving truck prepared to depart, Marcus made a last desperate attempt. Where are we supposed to go? Our honeymoon flights aren't until Wednesday, and Amber's apartment is already rented to someone else. That's not my problem to solve, I replied, exhausted by the morning's confrontation. You created this situation with your lies and manipulation. You'll need to figure it out. Family means nothing to you, does it? Marcus spat, his charm finally abandoned. Just your precious house and your money. That's all you care about. The accusation stung, but I held firm. Family means everything to me. That's why your betrayal hurts so deeply. You tried to steal my home, Marcus. Not borrow it, steal it through deception and manipulation. As they finally drove away, Marcus and Amber in their car, her parents in theirs, the moving truck following behind, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief that my home was secure, anger at the deception, and profound sadness at what this meant for my relationship with my brother. You did the right thing, Richard assured me, packing away the documents we hadn't needed to use. They were attempting to establish tenancy, which could have created significant legal complications had they succeeded in moving in. I know, I sighed, but it doesn't make it any easier. Richard patted my shoulder sympathetically. Family conflicts are always the hardest. Give it time. Perhaps once the dust settles, there can be a conversation about boundaries and rebuilding trust. But as I surveyed my property, the wedding decorations still partially in place, furniture rearranged, gardens altered, I wondered if some bridges once burned could ever truly be rebuilt. The immediate crisis had been averted, but the aftermath proved complicated and painful. As Richard and I walked through my property assessing the situation, we discovered numerous concerning alterations that went far beyond typical wedding preparations. They've removed fixtures in the guest bathroom, I noted, pointing to the vacant space where my antique vanity had stood. And the built-in bookshelves in the den have been partially dismantled. Richard photographed everything methodically, building documentation for potential legal action. This crosses the line from wedding preparations into property damage, he observed. You would be well within your rights to pursue compensation. Most disturbing were the documents we found in the spare bedroom that had apparently been designated as Marcus and Amber's temporary quarters. A folder contained printouts of local zoning regulations, renovation permit applications with my forged signature, and correspondence with contractors scheduled to begin work later that week. They were planning significant structural changes, Richard said gravely as we reviewed the materials, including removing the wall between your living room and den to create an entertainment space and converting your home office into a nursery. A nursery, I echoed. They're not even expecting. According to this design consultation, Richard held up a form they were planning for future family expansion. The scope of their intended takeover became increasingly apparent as we continued our inventory. They had contacted utility companies to transfer services into Marcus's name. They had filed a change of address form for both of them, redirecting mail to my address. They had even enrolled in the neighborhood association as the new owners of my property. Around noon, as we were cataloging these discoveries, the sheriff arrived, not summoned by us, but by Marcus. I've got a complaint about unlawful eviction, Deputy Collins explained apologetically after introducing himself, filed by Marcus Mills and Amber Barrett Mills. They're claiming you threw them out of their residence without proper notice. Richard immediately presented the property deed and relevant documentation. As you can see, this is solely owned by Woodrow Mills. The complainants had permission to use the property for a wedding weekend, nothing more. The deputy reviewed the documents carefully. Did they have any mail delivered here? Any evidence they were establishing residency? They attempted to, Richard explained, showing him the change of address forms we had discovered. But these were filed without the property owner's knowledge or consent, and no mail has yet been delivered to them at this address. After examining all the evidence, Deputy Collins nodded. This is clearly not an unlawful eviction situation. They never established legal tenancy. I'll update the report accordingly. As he was preparing to leave, Marcus and Amber pulled into the driveway accompanied by her parents and a man I didn't recognize. That's our attorney, Marcus announced, pointing to the stranger as they approached. He says you can't just throw us out without proper eviction proceedings. The deputy stepped forward. I've reviewed the documentation, sir. You were guests, not tenants. The property owner has every right to require you to leave. But we moved our things in, Amber protested. We changed our address. Without permission, I pointed out. And after explicitly agreeing that the property was only available for the wedding weekend, Amber's father turned to Marcus, his face flushed with anger. You represented yourself as co-owner of this property. You showed us documents indicating you had legal right to occupy and modify it. I can explain, Marcus began, but Harold cut him off. You told us Woody had signed over partial ownership to you after your mother died. You showed us papers. Richard raised an eyebrow. Were these the papers in question? He held up documents we had found, property transfer forms with my forged signature that had never been filed with any official office. Amber gasped, turning to Marcus with shocked betrayal in her eyes. You forged documents. You lied about owning this house. Not exactly, Marcus stammered. I was going to talk to Woody about making it official. I just got ahead of things a bit. Forgery and attempted property fraud are serious crimes, Richard noted calmly. My client would be well within his rights to pursue criminal charges. The threat of legal consequences seemed to finally penetrate Marcus's denial. Woody, come on. You wouldn't press charges against your own brother. I don't want to, I admitted. But you've left me little choice. You lied to your wife, her family, and attempted to steal my home through deception and forgery. The confrontation escalated as Amber's lawyer, after reviewing the documentation Richard provided, quietly advised his clients that they had no legal standing. Harold berated Marcus for his deception. Patricia comforted a now sobbing Amber. The deputy stood by, ensuring the situation remained nonviolent. "I trusted you, Amber," cried, turning her anger fully on Marcus. "I built our entire future around this house because you swore it would be ours." "It was going to be," Marcus insisted. "Woody always looks out for me. He would have come around to the idea once we were settled in." "So your plan was to move in without permission, and hope I'd eventually accept it?" I asked incredulously. Marcus had the decency to look ashamed. "You've always given me everything I asked for. Why would this be different?" His words struck me like a physical blow, revealing the fundamental disconnection between us. In his mind, my years of support and generosity weren't acts of brotherly love but evidence of weakness, a pattern he expected to continue regardless of how outrageous his demands became. "This is different because it's my home," I said quietly. "Because you lied and manipulated rather than simply asking. Because you were willing to destroy our relationship for property." The situation resolved with painful finality. The deputy informed Marcus and Amber they needed to leave immediately or face trespassing charges. Harold and Patricia, now fully aware of their new son-in-law's deception, arranged for hotel accommodations. The attorney advised them to cease all claims on the property to avoid potential legal repercussions. As they prepared to leave, Amber approached me, her earlier tears replaced by cold dignity. "I'm sorry about your home. I truly believed Marcus when he said this was a shared family property. I would never have participated in this if I'd known the truth." "I believe you," I told her, and I did. She had been misled just as much as her parents had been. Marcus made one final appeal as he headed to their car. "This isn't over, Woody. Family is supposed to help family. Mom would be ashamed of how you've treated me today." "No," I replied firmly. "Mom would be ashamed of how you tried to take advantage of me, of how you lied and manipulated everyone around you, instead of building your own life honestly." As their vehicles disappeared down the driveway, I turned back to my home, damaged, rearranged, but still mine. The relief I should have felt was overshadowed by profound sadness at the realization that my relationship with my only sibling might be irreparably broken. "What happens now?" I asked Richard as we stood in my disrupted living room. "That depends on what you want," he replied. "We could pursue criminal charges for the forgery and fraud attempt. We could file a civil suit for the property damage and emotional distress. Or we could simply document everything, send a formal cease and desist letter, and hope this is the end of it." I sighed heavily, surveying the remnants of the wedding and the aborted move-in attempt scattered around my home. "Let's start with the cease and desist and documentation. I need time to process everything before deciding whether to escalate legally." Richard nodded understandingly. "A reasonable approach. And in the meantime, I suggest changing your locks, upgrading your security system, and being very careful about any further communication with your brother." That evening, after Richard departed, I sat alone on my deck overlooking the lake. The property that had once represented achievement and peace now felt tainted by betrayal. As the sun set over the water, I wondered whether the damage done extended beyond physical alterations to the emotional foundation of this place I called home. The weeks following the confrontation brought practical challenges and emotional turmoil in equal measure. My first priority was securing my property against further intrusion. I had the locks changed throughout the house, installed a comprehensive security system with cameras covering all entry points, and even added a secure gate at the driveway entrance. The property damage assessment was sobering. Beyond the obvious rearrangement of furniture and temporary wedding modifications, there were numerous unauthorized improvements that required professional attention to restore. Partially removed walls needed repair, painted surfaces needed restoration, and landscaping changes needed reversal. My insurance agent documented everything meticulously, though he expressed skepticism about coverage since I had technically granted access for the wedding. "Most homeowner policies exclude damage caused by invited guests," he explained apologetically. This falls into a gray area since you permitted the wedding activities. The financial cost was significant but manageable. The emotional toll proved far more challenging to address. My home, once my sanctuary and pride, now contained memories of betrayal in every corner. I found myself startling at unexpected sounds, checking security camera feeds obsessively, and struggling to relax in spaces where the confrontation had occurred. My neighbors proved unexpectedly helpful in piecing together the extent of Marcus and Amber's deception. Ellen Johnson, whose property adjoined mine on the north side, stopped by with a homemade lasagna and concerning information. I should have said something sooner, she admitted as we sat on the deck. But Marcus told everyone he was inheriting the property. Said you were relocating to Boston for a big job opportunity, and had already signed over ownership to him. That explains why no one questioned all the activity, I realized. They thought he had legitimate claim to be making changes. He was very convincing, Ellen agreed. Had all these plans for neighborhood get-togethers he'd host once he and Amber were settled in. Even joined the homeowners association as a prospective resident. Similar stories emerged from other neighbors. Marcus had apparently spent weeks cultivating relationships throughout the community, presenting himself as the soon-to-be owner of my property. He had consulted local contractors about renovations, discussed dock expansion permits with the Lake Association, and even inquired about school districts with families who had children. The scope of his deception was breathtaking, not just in its breadth but in its detailed planning. This hadn't been a spontaneous idea but a calculated campaign to establish himself in my home. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call from Amber. Her voice sounded strained, lacking the confident polish I remembered. I wanted to apologize properly, she began without preamble. What Marcus did, what we did, was inexcusable. I appreciate that, I replied cautiously, but I'm not sure there's much more to say. There is, she insisted. You should know that this wasn't the first time. Before me, Marcus attempted something similar with his college roommate's family vacation home, and apparently with a previous girlfriend's condominium. This revelation shouldn't have shocked me given recent events, yet somehow it did. How did you find out? After everything fell apart, I started asking questions, contacting people from his past. The pattern is clear once you look for it. She paused. We're separating. I've filed for annulment based on fraudulent representation. After that conversation, I received a certified letter from Marcus, not an apology but a multi-page justification of his actions that managed to blame me for everything while accepting no responsibility himself. He claimed I had always been selfish with family resources and had forced him to take extreme measures by hoarding wealth. The letter concluded with a threat to contest our mother's will, claiming she had verbally promised him a share of any inheritance I received. The accusation was particularly painful given that I had used a portion of my modest inheritance from Mom to help Marcus pay off his student loans 3 years earlier. The rest had gone toward the down payment on a small rental property that now provided steady income, hardly hoarding wealth by any reasonable definition. My parents got involved next, drawn into the conflict by Marcus's one-sided account. Dad, who had been largely absent from our lives, suddenly reappeared with strongly worded texts about family loyalty. Mom's sister called from Florida, concerned that I had thrown Marcus out on the street based on whatever version of events he had shared with her. The family fracturing was painful but clarifying. It revealed who was willing to hear both sides of a conflict and who automatically assumed the worst about me despite years of demonstrated generosity toward my brother. Through it all, I found unexpected support from friends who recognized the situation for what it was. My colleague Patrick invited me for dinner at his apartment and shared a surprisingly similar story about his own sister's attempt to claim his first house through emotional manipulation and selective family communication. It took me years to recognize the pattern, Patrick admitted as we talked late into the evening. Always the emergency that only I could solve. Always the expectation that my resources were communal property, while hers were strictly personal. How did you handle it, I asked. Boundaries, he said simply. Clear, consistent, unapologetic boundaries. And therapy. Lots of therapy to work through the guilt and obligation I felt. Taking Patrick's advice, I found a therapist specializing in family estrangement and manipulation. Dr. Thomas helped me recognize patterns in my relationship with Marcus that had roots in our childhood, how I had been cast in the protector role early and had never fully relinquished it, how my financial success had become entangled with feelings of responsibility for his well-being. Supporting family is admirable, Dr. Thomas observed during one session, but enabling harmful behavior isn't support, it's codependency. Real support includes accountability and respect for boundaries. Those therapy sessions provided tools to process the betrayal without being consumed by anger or guilt. I learned to separate my self-worth from Marcus's approval, to recognize manipulation tactics, and to establish healthier boundaries in all relationships. 3 months after the wedding incident, I made a difficult but necessary decision. I sold the lakefront house. Despite the security upgrades and repairs, it never fully felt like home again. Every space contained memories of violation and confrontation. The property sold quickly, despite the hot real estate market, and I purchased a different home in a neighboring community, equally beautiful but unburdened by painful associations. The day before closing on the lakefront property, I visited one last time to collect remaining personal items. Standing on the dock where Marcus and Amber had exchanged vows, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. The hurt remained, but its sharp edges had softened. The anger had largely dissipated, replaced by a calm certainty that I had done the right thing in protecting myself and my property. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, his first direct communication since the letter. "Heard you're selling the house. Guess you couldn't stand the memories of how you treated family. Hope the money keeps you warm at night." In the past, such a message would have triggered guilt and defensive justification. Now, I simply turned off the phone and focused on the sunset painting the lake in gold and crimson. His attempts to manipulate my emotions no longer held power over me. The most valuable lesson from this painful chapter wasn't about property rights or legal protections, though those were certainly important. It was about recognizing my own worth and the legitimacy of my boundaries. About understanding that genuine love doesn't demand self-sacrifice at the expense of well-being. About learning that sometimes the healthiest form of family loyalty is to yourself and your own future. As I locked the lakefront house for the final time, I felt lighter than I had in months. The new property awaiting me represented not just a fresh start, but a more authentic life built on mutual respect rather than obligation and manipulation. Family relationships remain complicated, and the door isn't permanently closed with Marcus. Perhaps someday, with proper boundaries and genuine accountability, we might rebuild some form of relationship. But it would need to be one based on mutual respect, rather than exploitation, on genuine care, rather than opportunism. Until then, I'm focusing on creating a home that truly feels like mine, not just legally but emotionally. A place where boundaries are respected, where generosity flows from choice rather than manipulation, and where peace isn't disrupted by the constant anticipation of betrayal. Have you ever had to draw difficult boundaries with family members who felt entitled to your resources? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. It might help someone else navigating similar waters. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating complex relationships, and share with someone who might need permission to protect their own boundaries. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, blood may be thicker than water, but respect is the foundation of any healthy relationship, family, or otherwise.